Welcome everyone, Christine here with my race tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, from the strongest to the worst races to play, and also the broken. By broken I mean races that are certainly well designed in many ways, but they completely trivialize the game in very significant ways. It's up to you whether or not you want to enjoy those campaigns, but from my perspective, they're so broken that they just literally break the game and the design of the game. But anyway, starting with the Beastmen, I'm going to put Beastmen in D tier. I think the problem with Beastmen, when I'm looking at their campaigns, well, outside of Tarox, their Legendary Lords are not that special. Yes, they do have a diversity of locations, but none of them have anything really that unique. In all Beastmen campaigns, you're just beating up people. It doesn't matter that they're different people, you're just setting up ambushes, beating up people, slowly building up the dread to unlock higher unit capacity. And another issue with Beastmen, beyond just the repetitive nature of their playstyle, is like they're using one resource dread for everything. Say what you will about the Cast Dwarves or Tomb Kings even, they do have multiple ways of increasing army capacity or increasing various unit capacity. It's not especially great when you're thinking about the Tomb Kings with army capacity, but at least there are multiple ways to get to that result. Beastmen only have really one way to increase unit capacity and only one way to increase, or relatively one way to increase army capacity. You're using Dread or you're going for Rituals of Ruination, and given the pacing of campaigns in Warhammer 3, which have a very fast pace and the most interesting aspects of a campaign, or the toughest dilemmas of a campaign are always taking place within the early game, I just feel Beastmen fall behind. There are campaigns in this game where within the first 30 turns, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties, a lot can be done. Then there are campaigns where you're just sitting on your ass for 20, 30 turns, not doing anything really worthwhile. Beastmen are closer to that category. I do think they can have a more dynamic campaign than some of the worst races in the game, but yeah, they do need an update. And also, it's worth pointing out that when Beastmen were reworked back in the days of Warhammer 2, where diplomacy was, let's just say, voodoo magic at best, that was one thing. But nowadays, diplomacy does work much better, and so having a race that doesn't engage with those systems by and large is just not really a great situation. That's my perspective on the Beastmen. I do certainly think they need an update. I don't necessarily believe they need a rework, but I do think that they need to match the current campaign pace much better than they are. And look, you can tell me like, oh, I don't play campaigns that are that fast paced. Look, I'm gonna stress this out regardless of the pace you personally have in a campaign and how quickly you can complete a campaign. The simple reality is that the most challenging, most interesting portion of a campaign, where the actual important decisions are made, are within the first 20, 30 or so turns. Everything after that is just going down and down and down and down until it becomes a grind. Then we have Brettonia. Now, Brettonia is a weird case, so I'm going to put them in C tier. Let me explain why that is. So, on a campaign side of things, Brettonia has a great economy. They have a great public order situation. Their diplomacy may not necessarily be... They may not have the best diplomacy or climate situation of any race in the game, but it is workable. Brettonia itself as a terrain is not especially great. Brettonia, in terms of like the area of Brettonia, that is an issue. They do have problems with the research tree and the entire vow system, but Brettonia on the campaign side of things is fairly workable. Some level of frustration in regards to the vows, but if that was really the big problem with Brettonia, they would not be so low on this list. But see, the problem is, in Warhammer 3, the current meta is certainly not cavalry. It's not ranged units. The current meta of the game is melee infantry or monstrous infantry. Guess which race in the game completely lacks melee infantry and really relies on cavalry? And that is Brettonia. Their infantry is awful until you get a significant number of armories. You can make your infantry chaff work, but it takes you much longer than other races, and even then, it's still gonna be crappy peasant units that are, many of them are equivalent to Empire swordsmen, who are an awful unit to begin with. Brettonia does need an update in more ways than one. They need an update to their peasants, they need an update to the vows, they need an update to how you gain knights because of those vows, so on and so forth. And they also certainly need an update given the fact that we have so many sieges to deal with in settlement battles. And even if you're playing with mods that completely remove sieges from the game, you start realizing that full-on cavalry armies they do have limiting aspects to them. You do have some good siege, you do have good magic for what it's worth, but limited. Everything just feels very, very limited in Brettonia. And the fact that they're suffering in terms of their main, their roster outside of cavalry and trebuchets is actually a fairly substantial problem when you're trying to play them. Playing battles as Brettonia is not a great experience, especially when you're thinking about the siege battle situation. Then we have the Chaos Dwarves. I'm going to put them in A tier. Yes, the Mighty Chaos Dwarves have dropped down a bit from S tier. The reason behind that, I would dare say, is, again, campaign pacing. Campaign pacing is going to determine a lot of things on this list. Chaos Dwarves are a great race. Great mechanics, great unit roster, varied magic, varied lords. I do feel that Chaos Dwarves do go down a bit because Zaytan's campaign, to be quite blunt about it, just plainly sucks in a lot of ways, like his starting position at least. Like, Zaytan is a really powerful legendary lord, but actually playing that campaign is genuinely torture in Immortal Empires. So you're down from 3 legendary lords to 2. And you're left with Astrogoth and Drazov, both great campaigns, both great legendary lords, but then you start considering the pacing, the resources, how long it starts taking to unlock things. I think the problem with the Chaos Dwarves that has become more and more evident is that we are in a situation in Warhammer 3, especially since CA gave the AI significant cheats from turn 1 of the campaign. We're really in a situation where nowadays it is very important to get off the ground running as quickly as possible. And Chaos Dwarves just don't work like that. And I know people will say, oh, they become really powerful later on. I don't think that matters. I honestly don't care about that. Just because you can become more powerful later on does not mean that their campaigns are great, because it means every single time you're playing a campaign, you're always going to have to go through the same tedious crap in order to make them work. Good race can make it work, works brilliantly, but replayability does suffer, and it's always a tedious mess early on in a campaign. I do think that they need a better start to their campaign, and this is not just an issue for Chaos Dwarves, it is an issue for many other races. For what it's worth, it's a much better situation than Beastmen. It's a much better situation than Tomb Kings, but all the same. Then we have Daniel. No, Daniel doesn't even deserve a spot on this list. Like, Daniel is non-existent. I'll care about putting Daniel and the Demon Prince on this list when CA gives a damn to update him in any way, shape, or form, except just adding a lot of DLC units to it. Update the campaign mechanics, CA. You know, I'm gonna say this out loud. Some people might think that updating a race is some difficult, insane work. It is not. That is just rubbish. Like, yes, updating mechanics or adding new mechanics, that's different. But updating economy to work, unit unlocks, etc., that is not as much work as you might think. So, I don't think CA has any excuse to leave Daniel in the situation he's in. But that's just my personal perspective. And yeah, the whole marketing spiel about Daniel. Whoever was named Daniel in Creative Assembly, the rest of the team must have really, really hated him. That's all I'm going to say. Then we have Dark Elves. I'm also going to put Dark Elves in A tier. Let me explain. Dark Elves have some issues in terms of accessing higher tier units because of the tier requirements of that. However, as a race, they work exceptionally well given the current pacing of campaigns. They get access to a lot of heroes very quickly. They have an economy that's based on looting and sacking. They have naval dominance. They are the premier naval power in the setting. No other race comes even close to the naval power that the Dark Elves do have. The reason I would not put Dark Elves higher, and I don't care what the Reddit community says on this, by the way, this is just where I'm personally standing on it. And based on as much analysis as I've done, but here's the problem with the Dark Elves. Their campaigns, their legendary lords just aren't that great. Like, yes, you have Lokir and Morathi, and to some extent, I guess, Malekith, as much as I dislike Malekith's campaign. And there are reasons why Malekith's campaign don't work, the terrain, etc. But you do have some campaigns that work. Then you have others that's just flat out not really that interesting. Well, you look at Hellebrand. She's not a horrible legendary lord, but a lot of people do dislike a campaign, and for good reason. The effects just aren't that great. The campaign mechanic system just kind of tedious. You have a great race, you have a great power of economy, you have a very strong early game power that matches the game pacing, but the actual campaigns and some of the higher end units, how we access those, that needs to be improved. And yes, the legendary lords do vastly need overhauls, like Malice Darkblade, Rakarth, and even Malekith. Like, they could all really use unique mechanics and just flat out better campaigns. Well, Malice Darkblade has a unique mechanic, it's just kind of an awful one, suffice to say, on that subject. Then we have the Dwarves S tier race, like by far and away. Very dynamic race, lots of variety in a campaign, just the fact that you can confederate other legendary lords. The fact that regardless of which legendary lord you're playing, you have an objective-based, dynamic objective-based campaign because of the Age of Reckoning system. Then you have the legendary grudges. Then you have to consider, okay, I want to confederate the other legendary lords of the dwarves. How are they doing? Every single dwarf campaign in the game can be an insanely great journey. Now, some people will argue that they're too easy, as their auto resolve is very strong, and that's not a problem. Some people need to understand that having to play every single battle, the vast majority of battles in a campaign, is not exactly fun. Dwarves really manage to work well within the confines of Warhammer 3, in the sense they do have to fight battles, but the battles they have to fight are the more interesting battles. Like, I was playing a campaign as Grombrindal, I did fight battles, but I was able to avoid a bunch of the grinding and pointless ones, and just enjoy the campaign and build a massive empire through hard work, not by just like being given that empire for free. No, through actual choices, dilemmas, decision making. And Grombrindal, I should add, had the least dynamic campaign of the dwarves. So dwarves have great campaigns, almost every single one of them. Belegar and Fora could use a new mechanics update. Grombrindal could use a less one-dimensional campaign. It is fun to play it once in a while when you just want to watch the world burn as Grombrindal. But there are certainly some issues with regards to that. But you look at Malachi, you look at Ungrim, you look at Thorgrim, superb campaigns. And Malachi is one of the most played campaigns in the game for a reason. Some people are going to be like, oh, it's too easy. Well, I'll be blunt. If anyone plays a Malachi campaign on Legendary and says that's too easy considering the nightmare scenario you have around you and enemies around you, I'm not sure what to tell you. But then again, to some people, a campaign being hard is about having really frustrating, grinding, crappy systems. I don't think that's a good way of dealing with difficulty. I think the way dwarves handle it, where they have a multitude of foes and decisions on how to deal with those foes is much more interesting. Then we have Cathay. I don't think they're on Brettonia level, but they're B tier. Cathay is one of those races that in a lot of ways they have a good amount of power available to them. They do work, undeniably so. They have a really good army. They have a varied army as well. They have a good auto resolve because of the armor they have on their units. But here's the problem. The harmony system, not that great. The lack of casualty replenishment, not that great. The Great Bastion system, not that great. The climate limitations, not that freaking great, even as Yanbo. Like, you might say Yanbo has jungle. Yeah, he has jungle. Jungle sucks. Like, everything, basically everything south of Nagron, like the southwestern portion of the map in Immortal Empires, just plainly sucks. Simple as that. And also south of Khemri or Nehekara also sucks. So the jungle warfare aspect that Yanbo has, not great. Cathay does have access, has one of the best starring locations in Cathay itself, varied enemies, etc. The eastern part, the southeastern part, which is also jungle, also sucks, don't get me wrong in that, but CA does need to update the jungle in a lot of ways. But the problem with Cathay is you deal with your initial situation in Cathay, and then you realize you've got nothing else to a campaign. You have no incentive to go beyond that. Problems with casualty replenishment, and just the fact that climate is unpleasant. So your incentive to go out there and spread out and deal with stuff is just not that great. It's not worth it. And the shame with that is you play Cathay campaigns and you never actually get to use the whole variety of units that they have. Because what's the point? Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen are enough for the early game. So Cathay really needs to work better within the current meta of the game. They're a strong race. They have a really powerful economy. They can have an insane number of armies very early on because of all the upkeep benefits that they have through balance harmony. But yeah, they certainly need certain updates in order to work better. They need a casualty replenishment system. They do need a better climate situation and more unique mechanics, I would dare say, for Miao Yang and Xiao Ming. Greenskins, S tier as well. Like, Greenskins, very aggressive, very powerful race. Yes, they have been nerfed in Omens of Destruction, but I gotta say this about Omens of Destruction and the Greenskins. They did increase the variety of units that Greenskins had. Pre-Omens of Destruction, one of the best armies you could go with Greenskins was a bunch of Goblin Archers and then Nasty Skulkers. Now, I rarely ever use Goblin Archers and Nasty Skulkers unless I'm playing, say, Skarsnik. It's just much better to go for Big Uns, Orc Archers, Orc units in general. They made the Orc playstyle work. You still have the Goblin units available, and hell, when Mangler Squigs being added, you have more Goblin units available than ever. But at the same time, they have made different playstyles work. Certainly a nerf, but they did increase the variety of choices you had early on in a campaign. And if anyone thinks that Greenskins are still not an insanely powerful race, just play Grimgor. You'll figure it out very quickly. Grimgor who just obliterates Zarnagrund within like less than 20 turns, 15 turns, however many turns it takes you. Depends on how hard you want to go on that subject. High Elves, similar issues with Cathay. Climate limitations, slow systems. It's actually kind of worse in Cathay. Like, you get casualty replenishment, but you have such severe limitations on heroes, such severe limitations on unit recruitment. Like, Cathay actually has better unit diversity than High Elves in a proper campaign. What's the point of recruiting anything other than Spearmen, Silvern Guard, and Archers? There isn't much, just fluff. And by the time you can even recruit other units other than the ones I mentioned, your campaigns are long over. High Elves are a scaling race in the sense that they start at their weakest and they get stronger the more you play them. Introduce the Warhammer free meta where the hardest portion of the campaign is the early game. That's a problem with the High Elves. Fast-paced campaigns don't mesh well with a race like that. I don't think it's bad for the game to have fast-paced campaigns, for the record, because spending 100 plus turns to finish a campaign was always a grindy mess in every Total War game. But at the same time, clearly a lot of races and campaigns are not designed for that, and that does affect the High Elves in a very substantial way. You have virtually every hero, with some exceptions, but virtually every hero only being able to increase capacity at tier 3. You only have nobles, as a general rule, that you can get at tier 2. One mage at tier 3 is an annoying situation that High Elves do have to deal with, because it takes dozens of turns to get to a position where you're even with one settlement at tier 4, and that just gives you a couple of heroes each. Don't even get me started on the victory conditions, so on and so forth. Lots of issues with regards to that. Then we have Khorne. I detested Khorne. I thought Khorne was very one-dimensional, very weak, not that interesting pre-Omens of Destruction. But the Khorne rework, not necessarily Skulltaker's campaign, the Khorne rework has certainly added a lot of life in Khorne campaigns. You have a great variety of units. You have a campaign pace that matches the game pace in terms of challenge. It's kind of your pick-your-own adventure with it. You have actual diplomatic capabilities that other factions don't, because you do have diplomatic vassalization. Yes, Khorne is kind of a master of diplomacy. Who knew that Skarbrand was the master diplomat? I'm not exactly joking on this. The amount of stuff I've done in terms of diplomacy and Khorne campaigns is just hilarious. Pretty powerful race to be sure, but also a race where losing an army, or you have things to lose. It's not like a Warriors of Chaos situation where one of your settlements or your settlements never get attacked. You can lose stuff in a Khorne campaign that does hurt you. But at the same time, just really great race, great unit variety that's available fairly early on. So it is a race that does work. And you also have all the constant teleportation you can do through cult, so that's also a lot of fun from my perspective in a Khorne campaign. It is an adventure in every single one of them. Well, minus Skull Taker, but that's Lestria for you. Lestria sucks. Simple as that. Kislev, F tier. I don't need to say anything more on Kislev. The supporter system doesn't work all that well. Catherine is an awful legendary lord. Astankia doesn't make any freaking sense. Boris Urson and Kastaltin are better off in some ways. Well, Kastaltin still has to deal with the supporter system. But the problem with Kislev, their economy is not great. The devotion system is not great. The invocation system is not great. The limitations you have. And the entire Ice Core training system is just garbage tier anyway. You're like, oh, you get randomized traits for your lords and heroes. And it takes you many turns to recruit heroes and ice witches, which pushes you in a direction where you realize you can go for that mess, or you can play a campaign in Realms of Chaos, even save a bunch of ice witches and frost maidens and load them up in Immortal Empires. Like, this is the problem with Kislev. Kislev is a race that if you play them normally, it's an awful experience. But if you cheese them, you obliterate everything in your path. That is not really a great dynamic for any race in the game. Ever. Period. On that subject. So, looking forward to the Kislev update. Lizardmen, F tier as well. Jungle warfare doesn't work. Especially for Lizardmen. Like, Lizardmen are a slow race that has limited armies because their economy can't match the number of armies that they need. And when you're dealing with the jungle, which Lizardmen, by the way, navigate just as slowly as some other factions, and actually worse than factions that have the Underway, so Greenskins, Skaven can do it better. Hell, Ogres, jeez, when you think about it, Ogres are much better at handling the jungle than Lizardmen. That's mind-blowing. Of all the races from Warhammer 2 that have always needed an update, of all the baseline races of Warhammer 2, the Lizardmen have always been the worst in the game. They've needed an update for a very long time, and I just don't think CA cares about them. Yeah, F tier with Lizardmen. Norsca, a Warhammer race in Warhammer 3. I need not say anything more on the subject. Just not a great race. Limited roster, limited lords, limited heroes, bad mechanics, broken mechanics, buggy mechanics, bloated research tree. Just an awful race to play. Don't buy this race. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your money. You want to play Chaos? Play Warriors of Chaos. Be'lakor is available for free for everyone. He is a much better campaign than anything you might get from Norsca. That's all I gotta say on that. Nurgle. With regards to Nurgle. So I think I'm gonna put Nurgle... It's a good question, really. Where does Nurgle deserve a spot? So Nurgle is certainly a powerful race, but they certainly don't work well within the current pacing of the game. So I think I'm going to put them alongside the High Elves and Cathay. They have technically better climate than High Elves and Cathay, but all of their campaigns have to deal with mountain climate, which is actually unpleasant and does hurt them quite a bit because Nurgle suffers more from unpleasant climate than most other races. Epidemius is a nothing campaign that shouldn't exist in the game. Like, oh, we're gonna do a free campaign. It was garbage. How you do campaigns for free like a Leaf-Anar, for instance, or Wood Omens of Destruction, Arbol, which are some of the best campaigns in the game, then you do Epidemius, which is a nothing garbage tier campaign, I can't really explain. But yeah, Epidemius just doesn't work that well. That you're left with Kugaf and Tamarkan. Tamarkan is a great Legion Lord, but he does suffer from the limitations. Again, the pacing that Nurgle has in their campaigns compared to the pacing of the game just doesn't match up. Now, I know that a lot of people that are watching this, you're not playing on Legendary difficulty, but I make all these videos based on Legendary difficulty and the pacing of that. I understand normal difficulty things are a bit different from that perspective, but even on normal difficulty, the hardest portion of the campaign is always going to be the early game. On any difficulty, that's the case. It comes down to the fact that AI uses cheats on every difficulty. Doesn't matter if you're playing on easy or not. And so the point where you're at most in danger is always going to be the early game. Everything after that is just a grind. And this affects Nurgle especially badly because limited armies, limited infections, limited economy, you name it. You can have more heroes than most other races because you have a structure that increases hero capacity for 2 heroes as opposed to 1 separately, like is the case for most other races. But still, I think like Nurgle just has some pacing issues, always had them. They went from being one of the worst races to being kind of middle of the road, so that is a vast improvement, don't get me wrong on that, but still not a great situation. Ogres, S tier. Great unit variety, great choices in the campaign, really interesting legendary lords that all play very differently. Goldfang is the most powerful and interesting of them, but Scrag, he's pretty crazy as well, and Greasus is the god of gold, as I would describe him. So I think CA did a really, really great job with the Ogre rework. They went from being one of the worst races in the game to being one of the best races in the game. Great job, and it shows it can be done. Like, what? Actually, I gotta praise CA for one thing. What they did in Omens of Destruction was amazing. Because you consider this, they reworked 3 races, and yeah, I know people may not like the Greenskin rework. I think it's perfectly fine. I don't like Gorbad's campaign at all. His campaign mechanics are just garbage, but that's an issue. Like, I don't like the design of any of the Legendary Lords, well, except Goldfang. But I don't like Skulltaker, I don't like Gorbad, as in terms of their unique mechanics, not necessarily as their Legendary Lord or skill lines, just their unique mechanics are not that interesting. But the reworks that they did for races, consider this, they gave Scrag and Greasus unique mechanics, they changed the dynamics significantly in Warzak's campaign, and I'd argue for the better. It's one of the few campaigns in the game where being in a jungle is not pure misery. Underray is great in that respect, and Rogue Idols at tier 3, pretty great. Savage Orcs, very viable nowadays. So they did that for Warzak. They updated Skarsnik to actually make him less of a miserable piece of shit, and he's actually pretty fun right now to play in a lot of ways. So they made every single Ogre campaign better. They made every single existing Greenskin campaign except Grom better. Actually, Grom did end up suffering, and they did actually improve Skarbrand. Like, if people say, oh, he's less powerful, he was very, very one-dimensional and cheesy as shit. Skarbrand's a lot more interesting to play in right now, so you gotta appreciate that about Omens of Destruction. There's a reason why every Omens of Destruction race is on the top of this list. CA did improve compared to Thrones of Decay. Don't get me wrong, what they did for the Dwarves in Thrones of Decay is astounding, but what they did with all the races overall with Omens of Destruction is pretty great. Then we have Skaven. I'm tempted to put Skaven in A tier, in S tier, but I think I'm going to put them in A tier. I think there's just too many campaigns, in particular the most interesting ones, that do suffer because of bad starts. I think Skaven have an issue with the fact that their entire melee infantry roster is kind of useless. So yes, I am going to deduct points from that. They also don't really feel like a swarm faction. Like, Skaven is as close to a balanced race as you're gonna get in Warhammer 3. They do match the campaign pacing. They can have very interesting lords and campaigns, but Ikkeklaw's campaign, his start position is not great. Fraught is not that much better. Skrulk is in Lustria with all the downsides that come with that, though he's probably the best lord in Lustria, which is not saying a lot, I should add. And then you're left with what? Tretch, Queek, and Snitch. That's great. Tretch is not even a legendary lord. So yes, I am taking points away. Ikkeklaw and Fraught do need better starting situations in their campaigns compared to the misery that they have right now, because it is especially miserable for Ikkeklaw. It does help ruin that campaign from my perspective in a lot of ways. But all the same, Skaven, in terms of race design, they're great. Except the clan rat Skaven slave issue, and you don't really feel like ever going with the swarm with Skaven. Like, you can play in many other factions where swarming your enemies is worth it. With Skaven, it's just a lose situation if you ever go for swarms of clan rats and Skaven slaves. That's just my experience with the game. Slaanesh is an F tier race, no doubt about it. Actually, I don't know, like F tier, D tier. I think F tier. So Slaanesh has some redeeming qualities, and I think that they are much better than the other races I've put over here. But at the same time, the lack of casualty replenishment, the one-dimensional campaign, the lack of replayability, the research tree, just so many issues that Slaanesh is affected from. The cult change, especially teleportational cults, did improve the situation, but yeah, Slaanesh is just not that great. The Empire. I wish I could put the Empire in S tier, but here's the thing. With regards to that, some melee infantry issues, but really it's down to this. 3 of the campaigns for the Empire, Gelt, Elspeth, and Karl, are great. I might have my own personal issues with Elspeth, but yes, she is a powerful leader in the North. The issue is that 2 of the campaigns, they are DLC campaigns I should add, are just garbage. So Volkmar and Marcus Wolfhard are flat out not playable. So good race, they do work. They do work better than all the other races that I have in A tier. But when they don't work, they're as bad as any of the campaigns in F tier. Like Volkmar and Marcus Wolfhard are F tier campaigns. And that is something I do consider when I'm talking about, like, how good are the campaigns for a race overall. And for Empire, you have 3 great campaigns. From my perspective, only 2 great campaigns, but that's a personal perspective. But you have 2 objectively awful campaigns in Marcus Wolfhard and Volkmar. Tomb Kings are similar with Beastmen. Like, they're not completely horrible, but they don't match the pace of the game. They have severe limitations early on. And later on, once you get the ball rolling, they are a nigh-on unstoppable race in the game. And that is certainly a problem from my perspective. Sinch, yeah, F tier, above the Changeling and Kairos Fey Weaver suck. Oh, but you don't enjoy the Changeling? No, I don't. And the vast majority of people don't enjoy the Changeling either. Just an awful campaign. Both of them are awful campaigns. Like, Kairos is just complete pain. The Changeling is a nothing trolling campaign. I'm sure that's appealing to certain people, but it's just not great. The Vampire Coast, also F tier, one of the worst races to play right now in Warhammer 3. Horrible unit roster, horrible economy, horrible campaigns, horrible campaign mechanics, horrible bloated research tree, horrible lords, horrible way of increasing hero capacity. Just playing a race that only has some good heroes in limited quantities and some good artillery with essentially no army roster, yeah, that's the Vampire Coast. Just awful race. Vampire counts, interestingly enough. So, vampire counts, where would I put them nowadays? Well, I may have put them in B tier at one point or another, but whereas I do think that Vlad, Isabella, and Kemmler have good campaigns and they do work, yeah, they do need an update. And Manfred and Gorse just not great campaigns. Neither of them are great legendary lords, really. I mean, they're both powerful. Especially Gorst is really powerful. But interesting campaigns? Yeah, watching paint dry is more interesting than playing Gorst's campaign. So I am deducting a lot of points from that perspective. You can get a lot of things done with Vlad, Isabella, and Kemmler. Don't get me wrong on that. But I just don't think it's enough to justify putting vampire counts higher at this point. I know I used to sing their praises. I think there are certainly great things in Vlad, Isabella's, and even Kemmler's campaign, but yeah, Gorst and Manfred are just not great to play whatsoever. Gorst is just watching paint dry the campaign and battles with his zombies, whereas Manfred, screw Manfred, more or less. He's not even a legendary lord. He also has to deal with one of the worst systems in the game, the Books of Nagash, which, yes, the Tomb Kings have to deal with as well, and does help ruin their campaign. So, I've really come to detest every single campaign that has to deal with the Books of Nagash because it's just a freaking awful system. It might not seem so on first glance, but the more you play this game, the more you realize just how bad that entire system is. It's something that ruins Volkmar's campaign, something that ruins Manfred's campaign, and something that ruins every single Tomb King campaign in the game. Then we have the Warriors of Chaos and Wood Elves. I'm just going to put them in broken. Why do I say broken right here? Well, are they bad races? Not really. Are they powerful races? Absolutely. Do they have a great unit variety, hero variety, lord variety? Yes. Here's my issue both with Elves and Warriors of Chaos. And it applies to both of them. In different ways, to be sure. But both these races completely trivialize the game in a way that isn't necessarily fun. Wood Elves in particular are just the enter button simulator. Warriors of Chaos, they're not quite the enter button simulator, but they don't have a lot of things going. See, when you're playing a campaign, then there's no risk whatsoever, then you're not being put in a situation as a player to improve. You're not challenged. And I understand that, challenges is discussion that people just want to see the world burn, but I think when you're playing a campaign where you're watching the world burn, you have to have something at risk. Like, say what you will about Khorne, you can lose. You can actually lose in a Khorne campaign. It's not likely. It's very unlikely. You might dominate the entire campaign map very quickly. I don't dispute that. But the possibility at least exists there. That does not happen in either Wood Elf or Warriors of Chaos campaign. There's never any real risk. You never feel it. You're never feeling like you're in any kind of danger. Our armies are ridiculously powerful. Whatever you lose, you can easily recover. You're almost never going to be attacked in any of your main settlements as either Wood Elves or Warriors of Chaos. With Wood Elves, you might only be attacked by rogue armies that spawn as part of certain events, not by any actual faction. If anyone attacks Athelorn, it is a very, very rare situation indeed, and you've probably screwed up in an enormous way elsewhere. That is the state of affairs. So it's a weird situation with these races because you can't compare them to, any race that's below B tier because you can't. They're actually they have great heroes, they have great lords, they have great unit rosters, they have great ways of interacting with units. The warband upgrade system, superb system. But they just don't work in a especially great way within the context of the Warhammer free campaigns. How would he handle that? That's a difficult question. Like, they're not awful, but they are kind of like playing a better version of the Changeling. The Changeling is an awful campaign because he completely trivializes everything, but the Changeling has genuinely awful systems to deal with, buggy systems as well, like schemes and all that. That's not a problem Warriors of Chaos or Wood Elves have. So they're better in that respect, but fundamentally they have the same issue. When you completely trivialize, and it's one thing to just say, oh, I'm playing the Dwarves, I'm playing a Grumbrindle campaign, I'll resolve every battle or the vast majority of that. But you can still lose, you can still fuck up. And that has consequences. What are the consequences for Wood Elves and Warriors of Chaos? Oh, you lose an army that you can recruit? Who's going to attack you on Bellacor's Island, for instance? No one. I've played entire campaigns as Be'lakor. I was never declared... you might play an entire campaign as Warriors of Chaos and never have a single declaration of war against you at all because of the vassal system. As Wood Elves, you might have declarations of war and then someone tries to step foot in Athelorn and they get annihilated. That is the problem, if you will, in these kind of campaigns. And that's all I had to say. Christine signing out. And in case you have any doubt on the subject of Daniel, yes, he is F tier minus as a campaign, but I'm not even going to talk about the Demon Prince over here. Stay tuned for more.